morning. It's a pleasure to have Gary Burnison, CEO of Korn Ferry Group, a very known global organization consulting firm present in more than 50 countries. Gary, you're being seen by more than 100 CEOs of the largest companies present in Brazil. And every year, Amcham Brasil organizes a conference for the leadership of the Brazilian private sector, which is known as the CEO Forum. This year, the CEO Forum will address the topic of vulnerability. In a vulnerable and unpredictable world, such as the one we live in today, we know that it's essential for organizations, but also for leaders, to recognize and express their own vulnerabilities to establish more human and true connections. However, there is also the need to incorporate vulnerability into the strategy and prepare to support people, partners, clients, and society. We want to discuss with you how to re-signify the word vulnerability, which carried before a negative connotation, but today is considered key to navigate to very uncertain and unstable times. You wrote a very interesting article entitled, "It's Time to Be Vulnerable," which explore very interesting insights about the subject. You mentioned in one of your speeches that one day a board member told you a word that impacted the way you see the role of leadership, and the word was vulnerability. How do you understand that a CEO can use vulnerability to his or her advantage and for the benefit of his company and team?
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, you know, I've been a CEO for 15 years of a public company, and if you would have asked me 15 years ago, what are the attributes of a successful leader, you know, it would have been strategy, vision, growth, marketing, you know, all these things. Vulnerability wouldn't have been on the top of the list. And I'll never forget, I flew back to New York for a performance review that was on me. And it was brutal. It was 2 hours. And at the end of it, the board member told to me, he said, "Look, you've got to remember a couple things. You know, number one, you have to be vulnerable as a leader. And number two is, and after this brutal review, line by line, you know, line by line." And he gets up from the table and he puts his arm around me. And he says to me, "You know, your job is to make people feel better after than before." And I've reflected on that many, 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 many times over my career as CEO, and particularly over the last year, when humanity has faced something that we haven't seen in decades. We've had a common enemy that the world has been fighting, and we're still fighting today. Whether it's in India or Brazil or other parts of the world, it's still with us. And so I do believe in vulnerability. You know, I've taken this opportunity over the last year and some months since this COVID started to actually purposefully be more vulnerable than I've ever been. I've shared stories that my family hadn't even heard. And, you know, one day over a year ago, in the month of April, I was taking a walk. And April, for me, for us, was a very, very dark month. May and June were rather hopeless. We had a lot of different things going on in the United States, including the tragedy around George Floyd, which was May 25th, a year ago. And so those 2 months were very, very rough. And I was taking a walk. I was walking my dog and I ran across what looked like chalk written on the street. And it was written by a child. And in it, it said, "Everything will be okay." And I immediately thought back to when I was 10 years old. And when I was 10 years old, I was raised in Kansas in the middle of the United States. It's 2:30 in the afternoon, and a moving van pulled up to our house, and they brought down the ramp. And I said to my dad, "What's going on? Are we moving?" And he turns to me and he said, "Son, we've gone bankrupt." And they were pulling the furniture out of the house. It's raining. And I'll never forget what he did next. And he put his arm around me and he said, "Son, everything will be okay." Well, those stories, those personal stories that we all have, not only of triumph, but of hardship, they form a connection with others. And I think, given where we are today and the change that we're going to see and continue to see, I mean, I really do believe that we're seeing more change in these 2 years than we've seen in the past 10. How we consume, how we're entertained, and actually how we lead. And I think today more than ever, we need to practice radically human leadership. And part of that is to express vulnerability as a leader. Very difficult to do, but it creates this connection. And today, it's this weird dichotomy because we can be doing this video and we can feel incredibly connected. And we can do so very easily, very efficiently. We don't have to get on airplanes. But we're also missing something. We're missing the connection with the human spirit, to look into somebody's eyes and see their soul. And so at a time when we are arguably more connected than ever, we're also more isolated than ever. And in certain parts of the world, that's more serious than other parts. But even in the US, that holds true. And so I think that today it calls for more than ever that we be radically human as leaders. And part of that is being vulnerable.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for sharing with us some of your vulnerabilities and your vision. But I would like to ask you, what are the impacts for the leaders that may fail to embrace the vulnerable present?
I think we're all missing a huge opportunity to make a connection. The world of work is changing. Culture, if you ask 5 people to give the definition of culture, you'll get 10 different answers. At Korn Ferry, we would say it's the way an organization gets things done. And the way that an organization gets things done today is going through a dramatic change. If you look at the way young people coming out of college are looking at their careers, that's substantially different than my generation. I will have worked for 5 companies in the course of my career. My oldest daughter, who's 28, has already worked for 4. And so what you have today is career nomads. You have people that are, if they're fortunate enough to go to college and they get out of college, they're a little bit of a wanderer. They're a bit of a nomad. And, there's a hidden P&L that nobody ever sees on an income statement, and that's called turnover. It takes time just to find the bathroom. It takes time to figure out how an organization gets things done. And today, with this massive change that's upon us all, and people that look at their career in increments, not in big miles or kilometers, making that connection, being empathetic, showing vulnerability, it actually could empower people. When we look at what creates an engaged workforce, well, money is clearly, it's up there, but it's not number 1. Now, it may be in the top 5, and I'm not saying money's not important, it is, but money is not a durable. And what we found is that actually people want to be loved. They want to know that what they do matters to another human being. They want to grow. They want to be developed. Yes, they want to be part of a winning team for sure. And yes, they want equitable pay. But that's, that's the least thing, actually. That's not the sustaining factor. People don't leave companies. They leave bosses. And so I think as leaders, to the extent that we can be more authentic, that we can make that connection, that people can look into our eyes and see our soul, that creates staying power. That creates, maybe that turnover is not going to be quite so high. And it does have an enormous impact on the P&L. And nobody ever talks about it. Nobody focuses on it because it's not a line item. Nobody sees it. But I guarantee you, if there was a line item on the income statement and it said turnover and the cost of that and the opportunity cost, it'd be shocking. It would get people's attention. And I guarantee you behavior would change. So, as a leader, it's, you always think of the left brain. You think about strategy and growth and all of that. But actually, that's 10% of it. The other 90% is all around people. How do you inspire? How do you motivate? How do you develop? How do you pay? What kind of organization do you need? How do you get people to wake up at 4:30 without the alarm clock? That's how you create a winning team. And so I think today, more than ever, that leaders need to embrace the right brain with much more empathy and vulnerability.
Can you give them some insights on how to embrace vulnerability, those who have not yet started?
What I've found in life is, you make your path as you walk it. And, you have to be willing to take that step. If you're not willing to take that step, it's going to be hard for somebody else to share who they are and what they're actually dealing with. And so, for much of my time in business, you kind of ignored the personal and you focused on just the business. And the old saying, it's not personal, it's just business. Well, that's not true. Business is personal. And so to create that bond, to create that connection, to create that motivated workforce, that inspired workforce, that engaged workforce, I think you've got to take the first step. And we all have stories in life. We all are struggling with different things. Just this morning, I was out with my son and I took him on a long walk because he was struggling with something. He's an adult. We all have vulnerabilities and you have to be willing to share. I've shared stories of, there have been times in my life where we've had to buy groceries. I've had to buy groceries with food stamps, with government assistance. So I know what it's like to not have any money, to go into a grocery store and to get the groceries and purposefully pick the line where there is no line. So nobody was going to be behind me, so I would be embarrassed. I think by sharing those kinds of stories, we become more human. We become more radically human. And with that, people open up and they see not just the function, but they see the person. The very weird thing about becoming a CEO is you stop being a person and now you're viewed as a function. People sometimes only tell you what they think you want to hear. They may not tell you the full truth. And so the ability to listen, to learn, to lead, to listen to the pauses, to share those stories creates that connection where you're actually leading human beings and you're not running a company, but you're actually leading human beings. And, we're not in a studio. We're not sculptors. We're not artists. We're not working by ourselves, creating a magnificent painting. As leaders, you get work done through others. And part of that is to create that inspiration. And I think one way to do that is by sharing who you are as a person, not just what you do.
Gary, let's think about for a moment on the teams, especially the C-suite teams. How can you deal with motivating them to embrace vulnerability, and how to deal also with the simultaneous effects it might have on your team?
You know, when you think about leadership and you think about a CEO, people always go to the what and the how and the when and the where and even the whom. But what people sometimes forget is the why. And for me, the why is the most important. If, you know, a business was started for a reason, and that reason wasn't just to make money. Now, that's an outcome, but the business was started for a reason. And so I think to the starting point for me, at least, whether it's a sports team or whether it's a company, would be to anchor the team in purpose. You know, as a leader, you're going to have hundreds of people making thousands of decisions, maybe every day, and you're not going to be there. So the best you can do is paint the left out of bounds line and the right out of bounds line, and make sure everybody knows commander's intent, that people are anchored in purpose. And I think that's something that we as leaders can embrace even more fully coming through this pandemic, is to really go back to the why. Why are we in business? Because people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And to anchor that leadership team in that purpose and to ensure that they actually believe it. Because if you believe, you'll achieve. And if they have that belief and they're authentic about it, that will permeate through an organization. So I start with the why. I start with purpose.
When you did realize that vulnerability could bring positive results, could you tell us how was this experience?
You know, I found it enlightening. I found it eye-opening, and it was very, very hard because for me, at least, my background was finance. It was investment banking. It was KPMG, public accounting. And so my brain was very much oriented towards the left side, analytical and all of that. And it took time. And is, in fact, as we've studied leaders, so we've done 70 million assessments of executives. Every year we develop 1 million professionals. We train them. Every 3 minutes we put somebody in a new job. Through all of this research, what we would say is the #1 predictor of executive success is learning agility, knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. Whether you want to call it good old-fashioned curiosity, whether you want to call it lifelong learning, there's different aspects of agility: strategic agility, people agility, mental agility, change agility. But the #1 thing, and we test for it, the #1 thing is never stop learning. And so I think, you know, the distance between #1 and #2 is not constant. It's always relative. And if you're not improving yourself, I don't think you can improve the organization. And so as a leader, you have to be committed to #1, being humble. Because if you're not humble, you're probably not self-aware. And if you're not self-aware, you're probably not going to grow. And if you're not growing, the organization's not going to grow. So humility and vulnerability are companions of each other. I tend to think of those as the starting point for self-improvement as an individual, and then for an organization.
Gary, to close this wonderful interview, tell me, if you are again with this board member that many years ago did your performance review, what would you say to him?
Thank you. What we found in life is at Korn Ferry, we believe, in terms of people's development, we believe in 70-20-10. 70% of what you learn is through your assignments, 20% is who you learn those from, and only 10% is the classroom training. You know, none of us know our potential. You don't know your potential unless you're given opportunity. And as a leader, we have to be committed to being in the opportunity business. And flashing back so many years ago to that board member, if you try to hold yourself to the standard he said to me, and it may sound very pedestrian, it may sound very easy, but if you just hold yourself to that standard every single day, do people feel better after than before in any kind of interaction with you? It's amazing what that can do.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much for this interview. I'm sure our members will appreciate the insights you shared with us and the food of thought that you bring us today. We hope to have you in person at Amcham Brasil in a future opportunity. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.